Welcome to R2-3D, my name is Alan, and in this video I'll be showing you how to make the Ghoul from Fallout. This week's model is brought to you by the good folks at Gambody. I'm in no way sponsored by them, it's just a good place to get your models from in my opinion, and I've used them quite a lot. They also are open to critiques and suggestions as I found out, and more on that later. The best place to start is printing it all out. I use my trusty Elegoo Saturn 8K. It's got a fairly large build volume and has served me well. Once the prints are finished, it's just a case of taking them off the magnetic slap plate I prefer to use and then cleaning them up ready for priming. I often like to give my print projects a personal touch, and this one is no exception. For this one I modelled a new base plate to replicate the scene from the Philly shootout, complete with a streetlight and wooden boardwalk. I modelled the whole thing in 3D Studio Max and then exported it to Lychee Slicer. One of the downsides to 3D printing is that sometimes you get a distortion on a flat surface that's supposed to join together. This is due to the orientation of the part on the build plate, but I wanted to keep all the support marks on the inside surfaces, so I fixed the problem with liquid resin from a squeezy bottle and a UV pen. I used magnets to hold the street light to the base plate. I glued a metal tube into the base plate to go up inside the Ghoul's leg to support him so he wouldn't fall over. Here you can see I'm gauging just how far the rod can go up inside his leg to best support him. I then carefully drilled a hole into the base plate and used 5-minute epoxy to glue it in place. I find that white paint helps me identify any areas that still require support mark repairs. Here's that squeezy bottle again. This is how I fill gaps between parts on a model. I apply a thin line of liquid resin and then use the UV pen to harden it. Once the repairs are painted over, you'll never notice them. Then it was on to the arduous task of trying to get a zenithal highlight on all the little parts of the Ghoul's coat. Let's just say this took quite a while. And now for the star of the show, burnt umber. You'll be seeing quite a lot of that colour in this process. In fact, you'll be seeing quite a lot of brown in this process. Everything on this thing is either brown or has brown on it. I actually applied the burnt umber in several passes, gradually making it darker and darker in the areas that it needed to be. The Ghoul's trousers are a combination of grey and brown. They get more brown as you go down towards the feet. I'll be doing a lot of dirt passes at the bottom later on. Next is a pass of more greyish brown, again building it up in small thin layers. There are actually 3 or 4 layers that you see in this part here. For the boots I chose a base layer of mid-grey. This will have several dirt passes applied on top of that. For the initial dirt pass on the pants, I used an Army Painter Monster Brown colour. You have to be very careful with the application of the dry brush for the pants and apply the dry brush in the same direction as the stripes on the pants. And for his belt, I used a different shade of brown this time to help differentiate it from the rest of his clothes. And it's back to burnt umber again, but this time it's for the holsters for his knife, his gun and his rifle. The idea here is to just build up the colour in layer by layer, just put in thin layers. You don't want to flood all the detailing in the print and destroy the leather effect. Next I'm using two washes to apply to the Ghoul's jacket. These will help darken down the shadowy areas without destroying the colour. And I'll add a little dark brown wash to the wooden box just to tone it down a little bit. For the dry brushing of the Ghoul's jacket, I used a USA flat brown from Vallejo. At first this can look a bit light, but I will be getting a couple of passes of wash over the top and another dry brush on top for a dusty look. And now for a first pass with the Citadel colour washes to help bring back some of that colour. And for the Ghoul's bandolier I'm going to darken it down with a hull red. This will give a nice base layer for all the dry brushing that will go on top. It's that colour again, burnt umber, but this time it's for the Ghoul's gloves. I applied a base coat of black to the Ghoul's gun. It will give a good base for the gunmetal and silver that will go over the top. And now for one of my favourite paints, Decacolor Gold. This stuff covers so well you only need one coat and it leaves a perfect gold finish. A nice light grey from Army Paints just to pick out the buttons and to differentiate them from the coat. For the gun it was a case of painting it gunmetal silver, then dry brushing steel, and then finally painting the wood parts umber. For the bandolier, I wanted to pick out the edges on all the worn parts with USA flat brown with a flat brush and just using the edge to just drift over it. The Ghoul's waistcoat is actually quite a bit darker than his jacket, so I wanted to paint it with hull red diluted maybe 50-50 so that I could get a nice thin glaze and paint it dark into the recesses. After priming the streetlight, I painted it with a metallic rust colour. I then added some lowlights with a going over of a black wash. and then painting the bulb white and steel silver. I gave all the leather holster parts a good going over with Citadel Reikland Flesh Shade to have a nice deep, rich leather tone. Next was a much diluted version of all these three paints put together to produce a nice deep glaze for the leather. This will be applied in several layers until it looks right. I painted the wooden parts of his rifle a hull red colour. It gives a nice deep, rich wood texture. You'll also notice that I cut the end off the barrel of the rifle as it wouldn't fit into the holster. I then painted all the metal parts with a combination of 50-50 gunmetal steel. I finished off the metal parts of the rifle with a Citadel Null Oil. This knocks back the metal a bit and gives it a nice realistic tone. I used 5-minute epoxy to glue all the parts onto the body. I glued a brass tube into the Ghoul's leg. This matched the post that was already fitted into the base and meant that he no longer leaned. If you remember at the start of the video, I said that Gambody were quite receptive to ideas. Well, the head and hat are originally one piece from Gambody, and I separated them myself. I gave word back to Gambody about it being difficult to paint, and they actually implemented the change, and it is now available from their website in 2 pieces. A handy tip for those awkward to paint parts is to glue a magnet to the end of a long cocktail stick. This will help if you have a magnet in your object and you can just stick the two together. At the moment my room is actually very hot and it's causing the airbrush to splatter sometimes. Here you can see one instance of this happening. I decided to keep it in and just use it as some damage to the hat. Here I'm actually using a 50-50 mix of burnt umber and water to get a nice wash over the cord on his hat. With the Ghoul's head primed, I was now able to start with a dead white zenithal highlight. Now, with a quick shout out to Brent at Ground Affected, I'm starting the skin tones with a Warlord purple. As anyone who's watched his channel will know, it's part of his Pinkle process. And next up is a transparent red, which I spray from a low angle to accentuate the lowlights. And I actually now go back over the bits I missed in the first part with the purple. And now it's the start of the actual flesh tones with medium flesh tone by Vallejo. This I sprayed from a high angle to achieve a highlight effect. And next up, I use a basic skin tone by Vallejo. This is to accentuate the highlights even further. And next up, to add some colour back into his face, it's the old favourite Orcish Dermis, this time from a low light angle. I used deck tan rather than pure white for the eyes and for the teeth. It really doesn't look right when you paint with pure white. I think it looks much more realistic with a deck tan shade. I'm trying to be careful here and not paint his teeth as if they were one solid tooth. By keeping it thin, I can maintain the individual teeth. I used the Orcish Dermis again here, this time for his lips. It gives a nice natural tone to his face. I used an umber wash next, but heavily diluted with a lot of water. This is to produce a very thin, fine brown, barely got any colour in it at all, to accentuate the crevices and detail in his face. I also used it to darken down the teeth and the sclera in the eyes. I use a basic skin tone here to just dry brush over his face and pick out the highlights. I picked a US flat brown for the eye colour, and I think it worked quite well. I find it much easier to do this fine detail with a black marker pen for the pupils of his eyes. I use just a little dab of brain matter white for a highlight in his eye. And to get that nice wet look to the eye, I actually use clear resin from Green Stuff World. I find this is actually a bit easier to work with a cocktail stick, just to spread it over the eye. And here I'm actually using a little dab of matte varnish to just go over the bits that went over the skin. And for the lips I used a 50-50 mixture of matte and gloss varnish just to give them a little bit of a sheen. The last part of the Ghoul to do was his shirt collar, which is a nice deep blue colour. For this I used a base of Vallejo dark blue and then dry brushed electric blue, which is a much lighter colour on top. I then added a finishing touch of a low light with dark blue wash. The base was the last part of this project to finish, and I chose to experiment with a covering of acrylic mud by MIG Ammo. I've never used this stuff before, but I knew that I was going to use it, so I wasn't too bothered about the join in the base, as I knew that I was going to cover it with this stuff and it wouldn't be seen. The first product I used on the mud turned out to be the wrong thing and produced an effect akin to moss and just soaked up any paint I applied on top of it. I had to therefore apply a layer of wood glue mixed with water to enable a thick layer of sand type ballast and small rocks to stick to it. I pressed the rocks into the sand to ensure that they remained stuck down. One handy tip that I picked up was to apply isopropyl alcohol through an atomizer and spray it over the base before putting the wood glue down. That enables it to soak in much easier. Once everything had dried and the excess was tipped off, I was able to start airbrushing the colour of the ground. I used a combination of several Tamiya paints and gradually lightened the ground by adding more and more of the lightest shade. This took many passes and I applied the lighter shades gradually to the parts of the ground that were on the upper surface. I sprayed the thin diluted burnt umber onto the shadowy areas. You can see here that I'm picking out the highlights of the stones and the higher parts of the ground. Here you can see that I replaced the streetlight and the Ghoul's legs in order to apply the same shade of sand and dust so that they tied together better with the ground. Now I know what you're thinking, it must be finished now, but the rocks that were scattered over the ground I actually hand painted varying colours to give them a more realistic appearance. Yes, I think this took quite a while in the end, but I hope you'll agree that it was worth it, and with that I will call it done. I hope you found something useful or at least entertaining in this video. It's a bit longer than my normal one, and if you like this length of video then please leave a comment below. Until next time, this has been R2-3D and I'll see you in the next one.
I don't wanna set the world on fire, friend. Just a spark that lights the dark where highways bend. A lonesome heart carries dreams that never end. Through the fields and dusty roads where love begins. I'm the ghoul of endless nights. I don't want a tear if it means your heart's aching. Just want a smile to erase the love we've taken. Beneath the winter sky, where the cold winds blow, hold your memory close, then I'll let you go.